Hi, I'm Gloria Latorre, and I'm doing Chapter 15 level questions, adjusting question strategies to level language levels of students. And leveled questions are used when teachers adapt the way that they ask questions so that students can respond to them according to their language acquisition stage. To level questions, teacher must observe how students speak and note how they interact in English. Once the teacher knows the level at which a student interacts in English, the questions the teacher poses to the students can be adjusted to ensure student success. And this may involve the teacher using gestures or visuals or slowing down her speech or his speech while slightly while they're asking the questions. And the teacher asks the questions in a way that encourages the students by pointing to visuals, giving one-word responses, or complete sentence or explanations depending on the student's level of acquisition. To use this level effectively, teachers need to know the exact level of language acquisition that their student is on at the moment and provide enough context in the questions so that the student can respond either verbally or non-verbally with understanding and confidence. There's a couple of steps in doing this strategy with ELL students. The first step is observe and document students' language levels. The teachers have to observe the students to determine their current levels of interaction in English, and usually this is done like on a checklist, and they indicate whether the student is on a pre-production stage, early production stage, speech emergent, or intermediate fluency, and they use a checklist while observing the student to see what characteristics that they have that fit under each stage of language acquisition. The second step of this strategy includes gathering and choosing materials, and the teacher has to determine which materials, such as visuals, artifacts, or gestures, that they will use to make your meaning clear to the ELL students while you're asking the question. The third step is to plan a hierarchy of questions and plan a series of questions that will help you involve your students and determine their levels of understanding of the material while you're teaching. There's different expectations for each stage when you're asking the questions. So for the pre-production stage, some expectations while the students are answering the questions may be nodding, pointing to an object or a picture, or physically demonstrating the answer to the teacher. For early production, an expectation might be for an answer 1 or 2 word responses and making choices from given language samples, such as asking a student, what is this, a whale or a dolphin? And them pointing into it or stating that it's a whale or a dolphin. For speech emergence, some expectations when students are answering questions may be a phrase or short sentences. Teachers must expect grammar errors. And then for intermediate fluency, they can use longer sentences and they will have fewer grammatical errors. Appropriate questions for each stage include: for pre-production, the teacher may ask, show me which one of these is the correct answer, which one of these is the correct one. For early production, is it this one or that one? Questions can be answered with 2 words for these students. For speech emergence, the teachers can ask the beginning or the end, what happened next, where did you find the answers? And for intermediate fluency, the teachers can ask, how did you find the answer, and what are the characters trying to do? These are some examples that you can ask while working with your ELL students. When you're doing the strategy with your students, you have to make sure that you're scaffolding enough for your students for them to gain meaning from the questions and for them to understand. You also have to make sure that you're involving all the students in your classroom and make sure that you have questions already planned out to ask them depending on their language acquisition stage they're at. Also, it's very important to assess students' progress and understanding while doing this strategy, and it's a good idea to have a checklist that you created when observing the students while you're asking these questions. And you can observe a few students each day and have examples of verbal responsibles that are typical for each student, and then you can write these responses in anecdotal records so you can add them to the student's portfolio to document their expanding ability to respond. And you can also use these records for evidence later on. It's also good that the documentary strategies provide indicators of the students' processing, meaning TESOL, and Common Core standards related to classroom interactions and academic language. It's also important that teachers also use technology while using the strategy. It may be using the smart board, it might be using a tablet, a computer, using visuals from the internet, anything that the student can use when they're answering the question that might help them feel more comfortable answering it. And the last and most important thing that a teacher needs to do when they're using the strategy is use a self-evaluation rubric to monitor your own progress in leveling these questions. So when you're asking these students these questions, it's good to have a rubric on you to see that if you are asking the correct questions for each student depending on their language level. It's good to reflect so you can improve the questions that you're asking. Maybe sometimes the question that you're asking doesn't match the language level the student is on. The question might be too difficult for the student. It might be not as challenging as it needs to be. So having a rubric to use as a checklist for yourself would be a really good idea, just to improve the questions that you're asking for the students for their benefit, obviously. So now I'm going to ask a question I'm going to be doing an example of asking a question that I would use for one of my students, my ELL students. And I would ask the students, I would show them a math problem. I don't know if you guys can see this. Okay, it says 2 plus 2 equals what? And I wrote down the problem, 2 plus 2 equals what? And I also showed a visual example of the problem. So I decided to use like blocks, like tens, like the ones blocks that the kids use in the classroom. So 1, 2 blocks here and 2 blocks here. And we're going to add those blocks together to find the answer. So when I'm asking the student the question, I'm going to have a visual example of what I'm asking them. And I would ask them, show me, and this would be for an early production student or maybe even pre-production, and I could ask them, show me what 2 plus 2 equals, and then the student could draw out the number, or if they feel more comfortable drawing out the visual example because it helps them see it. So the student would they can write 2 plus 2 equals, and they can draw 2 blocks, and that's them physically showing you. Instead of giving you a verbal response, they can show you how they found what the answer is, 2 plus 2. Or they can even say 4. I'm sorry, I messed that up. They can show you that 2 plus 2 equals 4. I messed up there, sorry. So they can show you a visual example, 2 plus 2 equals 4. So they can show you 4 blocks, or that they can either show you maybe the number 2 with their fingers. They can do it with blocks in front of them. They can just say the answer. They can show it with the answer 4. I'm sorry, I keep getting confused. The answer is 4. So they can show it with their fingers. They can also show it with blocks, so they can have 4 blocks in front of them. They can also tell you the answer, and I just think that the strategy is really useful because it's important to have differentiated questions for students, especially when they're beginning ELL students in the classroom. I think it's important for them to be able to have different opportunities on how they're able to respond to these questions. I think it's fair enough for them to answer non-verbally with visual examples, for them to be shown examples of what to choose from. I find this strategy very beneficial, and I think that everybody should be using it in their classroom. I'm definitely going to be using it in my classroom. And I'm sorry for that mistake before. 2 plus 2 is 4, and I got kind of confused because I get kind of nervous recording these videos. But overall, I think this strategy is very useful, and I would definitely use it in my classroom. Thank you.